Ah, dang my eyes. Hello, my fellow readers. It is I, Dark Symphony 777, with another fan fiction review. As always, the link to the story will be in the description below. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, click on that bell for notifications, and leave a comment in the comment section below on your thoughts of the story. And finally, so my opinion is not indicative of everyone in the world, so please respect that. So the story I am doing a review of is called Frau. I'm gonna butcher this because I'm pretty sure this is like Germanic. Frau Märchen, it's a Miraculous Tales of Ladybug and Cat Noir fanfiction by Multiple Personas. I have heard of Miraculous. I think I've seen like 1 or 2 episodes, and the gist is like basically like a girl with the power to turn into like wear spandex. She lives in Paris. She fights things called Akumas, made by a guy named Hawkmoth, who's basically a fashion designer. It preys on people having mental breakdowns, and all the villains have like various gimmicks of what they're upset about. And like it does a thing where it's like she's like friends with a guy, and he like turns into Cat Noir, and like Miraculous and Cat Noir love each other, but they don't know that they're actually already best friends. I mean, if Clark Kent can literally just take off his glasses and like, there's a completely different person, and then just dress up as Superman, like, yeah, I'm pretty sure you can get something with like Miraculous. So, before I get into the actual story, this story, I don't know how to say this without like coming off as very blunt, but then again, I have no filter, so haha, this story is disappointing, like massively disappointing. I know this story was actually recommended to me by someone, but it still doesn't help the fact that this story was just completely, massively a disappointment. Except for one part, I didn't like anything about this story. So let's get started with the plot. Let's talk about the plot. So the plot follows this lady named Mrs. Bustier, who is a big fan of fairy tales. Now I'm not talking about the Disney fairy tales that do, happily ever after with like the princesses and falling in love and stuff like that. No, we're talking about old school fairy tales. I'm talking about Brothers Grimm fairy tale. And I love those versions of fairy tales. It's very cool that we actually get like this story was when was the story actually written? 2018. This story was written in 2018. Anyway, there's someone going into depth in like the classical fairy tale. Like, granted, the story doesn't go into that much depth because this is another story that wants to try and be like the cartoon, and I think that's where a lot of the problems of the story stems from, because the author is trying too hard to make the story to have the same vibe and feel of the cartoon, but not doing a very good job of it. But let's just continue on this story. I'll explain as I go along. So Mrs. Bustier wants to celebrate the old-fashioned fairy tales. So she talks about how fairy tales were very raunchy, they were very gory, like obvious, which would be like The Little Mermaid, where at the end of I think, I can't remember if it's the Brothers Grimm who chronicalized the original Little Mermaid, but Ariel actually who dies and turns into sea foam and goes back into the sea at the end of the Little Mermaid. That's like an example. Like, the original fairy tales are like really dark, really dark. But yeah. And so she wants to show her love to the class, but like most people, they don't really care about it until she actually starts bringing up like the violence and the sex. I can't remember if I know some fairy tales, like old fairy tales, did have mentions of sex. I can't remember which ones. I know there's like 1 or 2 Arabian tales. That's it. I don't know. I can't remember any off the top of my head. There's violence and stuff like that. It's just very, very dark. And so, when she starts talking about the dark aspects, the entire class kind of perks up. It's like, oh, we like this because kids are adorable people. They don't want to see anything cute and cuddly. They want to see people's heads get cut off and bisected, and turned into sea foam. Yeah. So, Mrs. Bustier offers up a... Sorry if I'm grabbing this a lot. Mrs. Bustier says that she's opening a new class, like a club to celebrate fairy tales. Well, it's more of a elective, but that's fine. And she gets everything set up. She gets Marionette to basically get your family to make us some cookies and stuff like that. It's like, okay. And so she's getting everything. So hours later, she's actually getting everything set up when she gets a call from the principal saying that due to budget cuts, they won't be able to do the class because, well, the principal also says that he's pretty sure that you're like the only one who'll show up. So, yeah. Mrs. Bustier, upset, cries, attracts the attention of Hawkmoth, who turns her into Frau March. I can't say Akuma-size. In my stupid mouth. So, Mrs. Bustier becomes Frau Märchen, a keeper of storytelling. So when she comes back into the class the next day, she uses her magic to make all the students disappear. Adrian, who's Cat Noir, turns into Cat Noir, fights her, realizes that he's way out of his league with this. Tries to escape and manages to escape. Keyword manages. And then Frau Märchen uses her magic to kind of influence the school to turn it into a gigantic castle. Marionette, who's actually helping her family cooking, manages to avoid everything, sees everything turn into the castle. And then Frau Märchen knows, Marionette has some kind of connection to Ladybug. It's like, get Ladybug, and I want to challenge her. And then she sends a werewolf after her. Marionette turns into Ladybug. She runs into Cat Noir. They beat it, they kind of stop the werewolf, and it disappears. And then they go into the castle. There, Frau Märchen challenges them to a game of wits. The game is simple. Find me. Each door leads somewhere, and you gotta find me before the time runs out. If the time runs out and you haven't found me and beaten me, I get your Miraculouses. They accept, and then they start going into a bunch of doors trying to find where Frau Märchen is. Like, they kind of already figured out where she is. Like, she's the cliche, the highest room in the tallest tower, which is like fairy tale cliche. And so they go into a door, then they fight a henchman version of one of the students, one of the faculty inside the school, who turned into a fairy tale. So, like, we have one of the teachers, they turned into Bluebeard, and Baba Yaga, and Aladdin, and Alibaba, and Beauty and the Beast, and some of the other princesses, and the Little Mermaid, and even, like, very obscure ones, like the Paluda. Like, I didn't even hear of that one. I heard, like, most of these fairy tales, except for, like, the Paluda and, like, the Lamzi, which I think is, like, a spider fairy tale. Yeah. But yeah, this is where the flaws really start this show, because once they get into the castle, it gets repetitive. They basically go in a room, fight a henchman, go into another, look for the door, enter that door, fight another henchman, and then rinse, repeat until we get to, like, one specific part. But it becomes super repetitive and very dull when you're not doing anything creative with not only the fairy tales themselves, but, like, how everything's structured. Because, again, this story feels very much like the author is trying to emulate the cartoon. And I said before that it's a good idea. I said before that sometimes making the show like a cartoon, you want to give it that certain vibe. However, with certain stories, this is actually does more harm than good because you start to get everything. Because, how do I describe it? Cartoons and literature are two different mediums, which means they, despite the fact they may have some crossover, they largely have their own feel and vibe to them. And trying to do too much and trying to emulate exactly like the cartoon does, without giving it any identity as a story, as a book, does a lot of damage. Like there has to be a balance. Like they have their own, like literature and cartoons have their own set of rules. And what the author, from my opinion, tried to do was borrow so much from the structure and the layout of the cartoon that it completely capsized the actual story and kind of made it this garbled mess of just repetitive nonsense. Like, for the most part, once they get into the castle, the plot is literally just enter room, fight student, leave room, enter room, fight another student, and repeating over and over again. And honestly, I would have just completely gave up on the story if not for the fact I promised I would review all these stories. Like, that's the only thing stopped me from not finishing the story, was because I promised that I review it because someone suggested it, and I did it. But oh boy, that was a mess and a half. A really big mess and a half to get through the story. It's not even that long. It's like less than 90,000 words. But it felt so much longer. This is basically the same thing as Misconceptions, the Powerpuff Girls fanfiction I reviewed. Where it was... But that story's problem was it focused so much on the characters, it completely sunk everything else. Even then, I will praise Misconception because all the characters in that story are just completely phenomenal and really kept that story from completely capsizing. While this story, what characters? What plot? It's just, they enter a school. Lady challenged them to a contest of wits. But then the contest is they just beat up a bunch of students who think they're fairy tales. But like nothing really progresses with the plot because it just kind of goes in a holding pattern the entire time. It doesn't do anything to change up how they fight it. They don't give time to explore. You're not given time to do much of anything. I mean, yeah, there was a swerve where it turned out Cat Noir didn't really escape and he turned into Puss in Boots. But that's not really a swerve when the swerve is dictated on you not knowing the cartoon, which is the only reason why that worked on me. I didn't know anything about Cat Noir's character because I saw maybe like 1 or 2 episodes, and I think one of them didn't really have Cat Noir in it all that much. But I just didn't know. Get a bead on his actual character, so I didn't know anything. I just thought, hey, okay, he's acting kind of goofy because of the... Maybe since he's kind of partially under the spell, he kind of acting a little bit off, so I didn't think I didn't too much of it. But then he turned out he was Puss in Boots, and I'm like, that's kind of lame. I mean, yeah, it kind of works, but the fact that I only got caught off guard because I didn't know the character, that's really underwhelming. And even then, once we get to like one specific part, and trust me, that one specific part is so freaking just bonkers out of the park amazing, and it kind of like, when I was reading through that part, I was like, why didn't the author do this for the entire story? That was basically my thought when I got to that part. But yeah, the plot basically ends up with like, oh, Miraculous beats Puss in Boots. She finishes the mission. She finds Frau, she beats Frau Märchen with like a canister because Frau Märchen has the powers of like all the other students. And then everyone's happy because she made like a little after school club for fairy tales instead, and everyone lived happily ever after. It's like it's just this is the type of story that just does more damage than good when the author tries to emulate what the cartoon does, without realizing that cartoons and stories have different rule sets. They have different structures. They have different ways of doing things. So if you try and borrow too much like the other, and this is vice versa. If the cartoon tries to borrow too heavily from the books, it completely collapses. Like it's pretty much like any medium. Like if you rely too much on stealing too much from the medium that you're trying to borrow, use inspiration from, it's just gonna fall apart. It doesn't matter how good you are at writing. It doesn't matter how well done you think of the characters. It's relying too much on other mediums and what they're able to do that your medium cannot will just completely destroy it anyway. Nothing will stop that from happening. And this is basically a perfect representation of this example. Characters. What characters? You got Frau Märchen, which is not a bad villain. I mean, granted, you can barely call her a villain. She's more of an antagonist because, I mean, yeah, she follows like fairy tale cliches where she's stuck in the tower and just basically stands there watching everything happen, which is like a fairy tale villain cliche. So you know, that's fine. She's a really good concept. And she's a decent enough antagonist. I wouldn't call her a villain because we don't really see her do anything really villainous outside of transform the school into a castle and then try and transform Paris into the fairy tale land. I mean, it's kind of not really evil, but I mean, it's just very vague. I mean, she's technically a villain because I think Miraculous is one of those shows where like there's a villain episode. But I think she's just very underwhelming a villain. Like if we do the villain route, then yeah, she's underwhelming. If she's an antagonist, you're not really seeing much because she doesn't really develop that much as a character. But even then, she's still probably the most developed character because, you know, you have Mrs. Bussier, who loves fairy tales, who wants to show her love for fairy tales, and then becomes heartbroken when her thing that she worked on for such a long time to try and get past, couldn't get past, and it's just a mess when she turns to the Frau Märchen and she just stands on her throne, do nothing. Underwhelming. There's Miraculous. I mean, it's alright, but that's mainly due to the fact that it's so hampered by the story structure that it's just, you can't really glean a lot from her character. Pacing. The story's very fast-paced except for that one part, but it's just like, with that pacing, it's just... Going back to that story structure, I would be fine with the fast pace if there's just it's just literally nothing but fights. If the fights were at least done differently, like for the most part, it's just they fight and then there were a couple of fights that at least were kind of different, like Baba Yaga and Bluebeard because they try to manipulate the environment and it was basically a gang fight. But even then, that was at least decent, but like most of them were just hampered by the fact that they were just way too short. And there was just no build-up. It was just fight, and leave, enter, fight, leave, enter, fight, leave, enter, fight. It was just so repetitive and so boring. It just felt... I just dragged on unnecessarily. I don't like it. And it shows it's just not a lot of there's just not a lot of talk about because there's just not a lot of talk about. Grammar. There wasn't really any grammar. There just wasn't. I'm falling asleep because because the story is just so boring and so repetitive. Would I recommend this? What do you think? Like, honestly, I wouldn't recommend this. Except one part did at least somewhat save the story. And that is the 3-chapter mini arc based around Shiraze. Now, first off, I completely butchered that name. Nope, that's Schaffenberg. I mean, actually just look up how to spell her name. Okay. I do not. It's not letting me. Okay, Shiraze. I don't know how to pronounce that because I know that's from 1001 Nights. This one battle, because we can't really call this a battle, pretty much saved the story from being just probably the worst fanfiction I ever read. Even worse than Admitting My Feelings. And Admitting My Feelings is just so bad. But I love this part so much that it just completely just said, no, we're not gonna be the worst fanfiction. So, when we get to what chapter was it? One second. I actually have to go to the right chapter. Chapter 10. Once we get to chapter 10, there's a complete and utter tonal shift. When I first got to this part, I'm like completely just caught off guard. It's like, why? And then, because it doesn't take place, it takes place in Persia. And it mentions a lot of stuff with Allah, and then it says the tale of Bahram, Al-Maharajas, and the red clad tribe. It's completely structurally different. And seeing everything happen before this and everything after this, at first, completely took me off guard because it was just unnecessary tonal shift. It was the fact that it was a K+, but it talked about religion, it had death, it had all this stuff, but it was just completely off guard. It honestly felt like it was just a swerve for the sake of a swerve, and just completely, just utterly, just gave up at that point. That's what I thought at first. But as the 3-chapter part went on, I realized, are we in the effing Arabian Nights? Because here's a little background on who Shiraze is. Again, I'm butchering her name because I know I'm not pronouncing her name right. At least I'm admitting that. It's just her name is just not exactly the easiest to pronounce. Shiraze is in a meta context for the Arabian Nights, the narrator of the entire stories as a whole. So when you read the 1001 Nights and you kind of question what's with the weird narration style, and then you get to the very, very last story, the 1001 story, which is based around Shiraze, you realize that it's her narrating every single other story. So here's how her story works. There was a sultan, and he got heartbroken over his wife's death, so to make sure he never truly fell in love again, he would fall in love with a woman. He would marry a woman every day, but at the end of the day, he would execute them. And so, when he got to Shiraze one day, she tried to prolong execution by basically telling him a story. And so she would purposely cut off the story and leave it on the cliffhanger to try and stay her execution for as long as possible. And it worked. She would tell a part of the story one day, and then the next day she would finish that story, and then do another story and cut that off and repeat again. And she did this every day for 1,000 days, and as well as 1,000 nights. At the end of the 1,000 days and nights, she basically tells the Sultan, I have no more stories to tell. And she gladly accepts her fate of being executed. However, over the course of telling her stories, the Sultan fell in love with her. They had kids, they became a happy family, and once she told all the stories, he revealed that I'm not going to execute you. You're free to go. You're free to be my wife because I've fallen in love with you. And so they kind of live happily ever after. And that's kind of what this story is. So Scheherazade, in the context of the Arabian Nights, is a storyteller. She is a storyteller in a massive document of fairy tales stories being told. She is the one telling the other stories, while her story is just just recalling how the rest of the stories got written. And it's a really clever thing in a meta-contextual sense, but I really like Scheherazade. Like, most people, when it comes to the Arabian Nights, they only just remember Aladdin, and that's mainly because of Disney, but then I remember, but when it comes to the Arabian Nights for me, I remember either Aladdin, the Prince Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves, and Scheherazade, because those are the three ones I know. I don't really know much of any of the other Arabian Nights tales, but those three are the ones I at least know, which I'm actually happy about, that I actually managed to catch on to the fact that this was Scheherazade's work. So this basically becomes a story within a story, which is fitting with who Scheherazade is. So it's basically the story of the Bahram el Miraj and where is her name? And Pariza al Mosus, who are basically two Islamic travelers who basically Bahram was the son of a sultan, and they were traveling along the Persian desert, where they got assaulted by a group of magicians led by a magician who basically captured a jinn, and they killed most of them, but left the king and his son alive. So they managed to eventually the king died by giving him his last. The son wanders across the desert, finds a cave, not a cave, some ruins, finds a genie, and opens the genie, and the genie says, I was told one day there would be one wise enough to be able to find me and open me, so I shall give you 3 wishes for every century I was kept imprisoned, which was like he was held hostage for like 3 centuries. He said if he waited any longer, he'd probably go mad. And so Bahram made his 3 wishes. He wished for I beg you, restore my father in eye to full health and bring him to me. However, his father perished as he was granting the wish. Surely, tell me the name, and his second wish was, tell me the name of the bandits, so that way I can eventually avenge my father and basically free the area. And they're called the Azeza. And then his final wish was give him the power to be able to fight the Azeza and defeat them. And so the Jinn gives him the power of the Jinn to actually create stuff out of the desert and just basically kind of have some minor control of reality, but you kind of get tired and stuff like that. It's very well cleverly written. Like, that's the fact that the author cleverly executed a complete tonal shift, a complete writing style shift. Like, the story is actually written in the way Scheherazade told the Sultan in the 1001 Nights. And it's just very, very well done. And I'm like, the more I read into this, was the more I kind of was able to figure out what was going on. Because by the time I near the second chapter, it's like, this has to be something to do with the Arabian Nights. I'm trying to remember who in the Arabian Nights had some kind of context with storytelling and stuff, who would do something like this. And then I immediately remembered Scheherazade. I was like, oh, and I'm literally clapping to myself, saying that's a pretty damn good swerve, because I was not expecting that, because everything up to Scheherazade was basically just, as I said before, they enter a room, fight the fairy tale, and leave. So having this kind of weird, just meta context of a story within a story, and that was basically Shirazade's plan. Basically, tell Miraculous, not Miraculous, Ladybug, a story so that way she can willingly take off her earlobes that basically allow her to turn into Ladybug, and willingly hand them to Shirazade. And I'm like, that's really clever, and we're given like just enough clues that something's going on, because why would this be going on? Why would we be introduced to this random new group of characters? Why is this taking place in Persia? What is going on? So unless you kind of know Shirazade, you probably would be completely caught off guard. So I actually have to credit the author Multiple Personas for these 3 chapters, because the 3 chapters are just that well written and that entertaining that it just stops this. Does it stop this story from being not recommended? Not a chance. Like, everything is just that. It's just bad that it just kind of drags these 3 chapters down. But if you want to actually go out of your way and read this, just read it for this part. Read it for chapters 10, 11, and 12, because those 3 chapters are just that well written, and it shows that if the author took the time to implement like a various twist on the other ones, like with Little Mermaid, with Beauty and the Beast, when they fought Snow White, Cinderella, and Sleeping Beauty, and all that, and he implemented it all throughout the story, this story would have been amazing, because that's how good these 3 chapters are. And that makes this even more heartbreaking, because they had these 3 chapters had such a good purpose and a good vibe, everything. Like, the only thing I didn't like about it was at first when it was just a completely unnecessary tonal shift, because it's like a fantasy adventure story. We're introduced like new characters, and that was only because I didn't realize that it was Shirazade at first. But once I figured out who, like, it was Shirazade doing everything behind the scenes, I realized that is freaking clever. That is just really clever, and I really love that. But these 3 chapters do not save the story. As much as I love them, it just doesn't save the story. So, what would I change? Well, honestly, the first thing we have to change is the entire story would have to be overhauled. Most of the story. So here's what I would do. Have the story start the same, with Mr. Bustier doing all the prep work for like stuff. Her showing off the class what the fairy tales are about. Have her become heartbroken and become Akuma size. Have everything stay the same. Including having Cat Noir become Puss in Boots. Like, you can keep him like that. But have everything change once Ladybug and Cat Noir actually enter the castle. Like, they don't get chased. Like, they get chased by the wolf, but the wolf disappears once they get a far enough distance away, because her magic hasn't encroached that far into Paris yet, so her magic cannot really. So the fairy tale beings cannot basically travel that far from the castle. Have that be the first change. So just the werewolf just goes back to the castle once Marion gets far enough away. And then have everything completely different once they enter the castle. Because once they enter the castle, everything kind of starts out differently. Like, samey. Like, they enter a hallway full of lockers. Like it looks like the normal school. But as they walk in, they see another door leading to the foyer. And it's right before they enter the foyer that Frau gives them the challenge. Find me. You won't. However, instead of basically them going through doors, have the foyer be a massive pocket dimension. have it be this huge, sprawling village. Because a lot of fairy tales start with a village. If you're going to do the fairy tale idea, go full hog with it. And when it comes to how the story is going to be structured, have it structured like an actual fairy tale. More specifically, the Tale of the Bamboo Cutter. So for those of you who don't know what the Tale of the Bamboo Cutter is, it is a Japanese fairy tale. It's also known by the Tale of Princess Kaguya. Basically, a guy finds a girl inside a bamboo shoot and basically starts taking care of her. And her beauty is so captivating that suitors come from all around China to, I can't remember if it was China or Japan, one of them, go to find her, but every time someone meets her, she gives them 5 impossible tasks. Basically, it's set up like, you manage to do these 5 impossible tasks, you get my hand. No one is able to pass them because they're the 5 impossible challenges. If you played the Toho franchise, there are 2 characters that are based off the... There's Princess Kaguya herself, and there's Moku, who is actually not really in the story, but she has a connection to one of the suitors that tried to get Kaguya's hand. So, those 2 characters are actually from that fairy tale. So they enter a hub world, and there's 5 faraway lands. And say that time moves slower in this pocket dimension than it comes in outside. And so the city is kind of empty at this time. So let's do it like so the little town is empty. Like, they can buy whatever they want. They basically try and train and rest. So basically, as days and nights go by in the town, it's only a couple minutes on the outside. And so they figure out there's basically one person there, and it can be a mysterious figure who is Shirazade. Let's leave her ambiguous, and she basically tells them the rules. You have to complete the 5 impossible challenges. Well, it doesn't have to be Shirazade. You could have it to be Princess Kaguya, and she's like the guardian to get the Frau. So in the distance, there's 5 areas, all based on a very popular location for a lot of fairy tale locations. Like, one could be a forest, one could be a castle, one could be a desert to represent the Arabian Nights, one can be a ocean, so that way you can fit in Little Mermaid and stuff like in all the aquatic fairy tales. And then one could be a mystical area to represent more of the Japanese, Chinese mythological stuff, because the fairy tales in Chinese and Japanese are like completely bonkers. And have it be more based off like mythological fairy tales, like with the North Wind and stuff, and the Sun and stuff like that. And they have to go to each location hidden somewhere in that area and find the impossible item to give the Princess Kaguya, and once they find all 5, Kaguya gives them access to a Frau Märchen. So there's like a big old mirror in like the center of the square of the town. And so as they go and find finish each impossible task, more and more Paris is completely enveloped into the fairy tale world. But instead of the people living there, they get transported into the forest. So that way, whenever Ladybug and Cat Noir manage to come back, they see that there's more and more people. The little village is getting busier and busier, and so they're able to talk and build this world. And honestly, this would be a neat idea to basically celebrate fairy tales as a whole. Because honestly, yeah, it's fine if you want to celebrate and become knowledgeable on like some of the more well-known fairy tales like Little Mermaid, Aladdin, Sleeping Beauty and the Beauty and the Beast. But how often do you see a story that does more obscure fairy tales like the Paluda and the North Wind and the Sun and Shirazade and Alibaba and Alonzi, the spider fairy tale? You could easily make this a mammoth story. Granted, you would literally have to really delete like 90% of the story. and rework it to the point where it's like, if I had to take a guess, because like each area would be like a massive arc, like incorporating like all of like each area. Like the forest area could be like Hansel and Gretel, Little Red Riding Hood, and the Big Bad Wolf, Alonzi, maybe Baba Yaga, and all this stuff, and have it all be massive. Granted, it probably had to be 400,000 words. Like it would have to be massive. It would have to be gargantuan. I'm not even like 400,000 even on like the low end. Like you probably have to make it like 600,000 plus maybe. And what about Puss in Boots? Have Puss in Boots be the guardian of like the castle. Like he's the big bad guardian of the castle, and they kind of get the castle halfway. Have him kind of hint towards, like, he's still acting like Cat Noir more genuinely, like he's still doing the puns, he's still being sarcastic and stuff like that, but have him be more confrontational. And when Miraculous kind of confronts him and said, well, as I was trying to escape, Frau Märchen did hit me, and while I managed to escape and get healed, it's kind of doing something weird. Like you can easily kind of like get some of his confrontational stuff out of the way by hand waving the fact that it's the ambience, the fact that he got hit by a spell, that's kind of making him more aggressive. So he kind of has some fairy tale aspects, but he's still like Cat Noir at heart. So that way when he reveals himself to be Puss in Boots, so that way it kind of hits more emotionally. It's like, haha, I got you, my lady. Do a lot more creativity with the actual fights. So like each fight gets more creative. Like when it comes to Beauty and the Beast, like instead of doing like them fighting 2-on-2, it could be like they, as Puss in Boots ploy, Beast knocks out Cat Noir, now it's a 2-on-1, and to make things harder, Beauty makes it turns the area into a maze, and she has to try and hunt, trying to get Beauty and knock her out, so that way it becomes 1-on-1, while Beast is hunting and she can't go over the walls using her yo-yo, and she can't do any of that stuff. And just do a lot more creative with the combat, like just change how the villains operate. Like do what you did with Scheherazade throughout the entire story. Just come up with the most batshit crazy ideas ever. And so once she gets to once Miraculous gets all the finishes, she puts everything up, and then will have it be night, and so Kaguya basically offers a bed, one final rest to confront Frau Märchen. And then it turns out to be Scheherazade, and you can literally just put the story that Scheherazade put in, that you have in the story, put it right there. But when Miraculous wakes up, Scheherazade said that she's not a combatant. She tried to do it through words, but she knows she has no chance of winning. So she basically bows her head, and to reference the original story, like Scheherazade bows her head, realizes that Ladybug, she has no way of actually winning once the spell is broken. But Miraculous spares her, like the Sultan, and basically leaves to confront Frau Märchen. So when they do the Frau Märchen, Scheherazade is not actually in. Like you can still have the tapestry stuff with like all the lords, but Scheherazade's tapestry is not there because Ladybug didn't defeat Scheherazade. And so when they fight, she uses more creative control. Like she basically goes full on reality warper. Like this is, and shows, and have it be like a meta context situation on what happened to fairy tales over the years. Like they're being kidified with like them slowly getting control of her and warping out her and basically disrupting her powers. Like everything becomes kidified and becomes like this really wacky, and slowly everyone starts forgetting, and then Frau Märchen, instead of you know, instead of becoming enraged and trying to fight Miraculous, she breaks down, and Miraculous has the book to basically destroy it, and then Frau breaks down, showing that she just wanted her fairy tale ending. Like, she's still evil. Like, she's doing it as a ploy to try and get one final strike against Ladybug. And she basically just wanted everyone to appreciate fairy tales, and she doesn't want fairy tales to be forgotten. Because honestly, nowadays fairy tales have been awful forgotten. Like, and that's kind of sad because I think this story has a lot of potential to actually act as a teaching tool for people who don't know much about fairy tales, to be taught about fairy tales. Like, I think this story would act as a very, very well done tool to help people learn more about more obscure fairy tales, or even like with like Little Mermaid, like the more original versions, like the Brothers Grimm versions. Because because fairy tales are slowly but surely being forgotten about. You can have that final fight reference that by just everyone kind of like her breaking down over the fact that she only did this because she wanted people to not forget about fairy tales. And then right before, once she gets Ladybug to lower her guard enough, she tries to go for one final swing, but Ladybug destroys the book and basically frees everything. And even when she's free, she's still kind of heartbroken, and she basically she's just still upset over the fact that fairy tales have been being forgotten about. And then have the elective thing where like the after school club, and have it be like a little class talking more about it, have it end on a happy note. I think would be the best way of doing the story. Because like I said, this story would be an excellent way to teach people about certain fairy tales. I just think it would be very cool to use this story as a teaching tool to showcase some more obscure fairy tales. Like, that would be really cool. But yeah, that is my review of Frau Märchen. I like this story. I wanted to like this story. Outside of Scheherazade parts, I didn't like this story because it was just so repetitive. It was so dull. It hurt. So this has been Dark Symphony 777, and cut.